The worst job I ever had, without a shadow of a doubt, was working at a movie theater in New York City in the early 80s. Sometimes when the movie ended and the lights came up, me and the cleaning staff would walk into what I can only describe as a post-apocalyptic scene. Every kind of bodily fluid or secretion you can imagine, I've cleaned it up. We had people who we thought might be dead, people who were screwing around and didn't stop when the movie ended. Every deadly sin there is, we walked in on it. But by far the worst part of the job was trying to keep order in the theater itself. We're constantly calling the cops on people who were fighting, doing drugs, just about any scumbag activity you can imagine. People did it in our theater. They tended not to screw with my coworkers and me so much as they knew that they'd have red and blue flashing lights outside, but it was still one heck of a job. Only once did someone actually put me in any danger, but my God, was it enough to last a lifetime. I'd had people scream and shout at me, but at 6'3", most people knew better than to get physical. But this one guy, he didn't even have to get all that violent. He didn't have to shout or scream, and he had me just about soiling my pants. So it all started when I was working the late shift, 5:30 p.m. to midnight or close, and for some reason I could just tell it was going to be a rowdy one. It was a Friday night, it was coming up on Halloween, and people were so jacked up that I swear it was a full moon or something too. Needless to say, I braced myself for one heck of a shift, but honestly, if I'd have known how messed up that night was going to be, I think I've just locked myself in the ticket office and stayed put until closing, in which I'd probably just end up pulling the fire alarm again. Yes, I had to do that more than once, and the fire department told me I'd be fined if I did it again. Anyway, I sell out a theater, make a show of checking some stubs, and sit back in the ticket booth to avoid the crazies. Then out of nowhere, someone walked up to the register and says, "Hey, I think someone is sick in there." I asked if they puked, and they said no, that I think they're on drugs or something. I'm serious, I think you should call 911. I didn't want to call the EMTs and then find out that someone had just fallen asleep or whatever, so I decided to just go check it out first, and if it was serious, I'd call 911. I follow the girl into the dark theater, and she points out who she's talking about. At the very end of one row, there was this punk rock-looking couple, crazy hair and leather jackets. The guy had his arm around the girl, and she's leaning on his shoulder. It didn't look too rough at first glance, just an unconventional couple enjoying a show of that freaky new Tron movie, as I like to call it. People sometimes ask how I remember which exact movies was showing, and I always respond with something like, when you feel like your entire world is about to end, you pick up on all the little details for some reason. So, back when I used to work the theater, I used to carry this weak little keychain flashlight that proved its worth on more than one occasion. I shine the light on the ground near the couple, and lo and behold, there's a bunch of puke at the girl's feet. Then I quickly shine the light on her, and yep, she's in a bad way. She obviously is not fully conscious, and she seems to be trembling while leaning on her guy, and I'm pretty sure she's either ODing or she's really sick with something. Either way, I'm calling 911. I just want to know why the punk guy doesn't seem to care that she's in such a state. So putting on my most polite, yes sir, no sir service voice, I lean in and ask the guy if he or his lady friend require any medical assistance. At first the guy just gives me the finger and tells me to get lost. Normally I just back off, no crummy job was worth getting punched in the face over. But this one solitary occasion I just couldn't walk away. You see, this dude was much older than the girl, maybe in his late 30s, early 40s, and she looked like she was no older than a high school junior. It just seemed like predatory, you know? Plus, she legit looked like she was ODing. This is going to sound harsh, but I don't really care if some hardcore junkie scumbag dies, but some younger person, some girl, who could have easily gotten a second chance in life. Nah, it wasn't going to happen on my time. But as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. I ended up making the nearly deadly mistake of reaching out and tapping this dude on the shoulder. I didn't tap him hard, it wasn't aggressive, nothing like that. It was just to let him know, I'm not messing around here. The girl needs medical attention, and I'm gonna call 911, so stash whatever you got on you because this girl's life is more important than your high, you know what I mean? But no sooner had I touched this guy, no sooner had I laid a finger on him, he grabs my wrist. The speed on this guy, heroin's supposed to make you slow or whatever, but that was nonsense. This guy's hit must have been working on him because he was like a freaking mousetrap. I touch him and whap. My fingers are wrapped around my wrist and he's turning in his seat to face me. Now I see him reaching into his pocket and my immediate reaction is to pull away because I think, Jesus, this guy's about to shank me. But he doesn't pull out a knife. He pulls out something else entirely. Still sharp, mind you, but what he did with it had me frozen to the spot. The theater is dark, right, but the movie screen is bright enough to light up like half of me and this guy, just enough so I can see what he's just put to my wrist. A syringe. He's not pricking me with it, he's just holding it there, and let me tell you, that was like a gun to my head. People reading this in 2019 might think that a needle is real bad, and obviously, yeah, it is. But this is 1982, all right? AIDS had literally just come out of nowhere. This country was scared. Not like COVID scared, buying all the toilet paper and stuff. People wouldn't use bathrooms after each other. Everyone's love life just disappeared overnight. This didn't go on forever, and people found out how to prevent the spread, but you didn't need no comorbidities for HIV to mess you up. And for a while, people just didn't know how it spread or with who. These days, they got all kinds of drugs that can manage HIV and AIDS or whatever. Magic Johnson is still going strong. I'd never have bet money on that back in the day, let me tell you. But back then, AIDS was like a death sentence, man. And not only did that guy threaten to poke me with a needle, what he said had me just about wetting my pants. Listen to me, he says. I got the bug. She got the bug too. And unless you want the bug as well, I get away from us right now. I didn't say a word as he let go of me. I just turned around and walked out of the theater. Yeah, I called 911 like right away, cops and EMTs. All the while, I locked myself in the ticket booth and told my coworkers to stay clear of the cops when they arrived. The cops turned up with rubber gloves on, like surgical gloves, and just walked the guy out of the movie theater at gunpoint. I don't think they even touched the guy until he was at the car and they put the cuffs on him. That was a scary time to be alive, man, let me tell you. And that was a scary time for me, too, obviously. But the people I feel really sorry for are the people who have to live with that godforsaken disease before science worked out how to fight it or whatever. That ain't no way to live, and it sure does make me feel lucky that I have my health. I used to work at a place called O'Hurley's General Store here in Shepherdston, West Virginia. It was a real old-timey general store, the kind that sells everything from buckets and barrels to books and pocket watches, in addition to the regular selection of groceries and liquor. It was an all-right job for a young man such as myself, patronized by generally polite and well-meaning folk. Sure, I had a fair few drunks get a little rowdy when I wouldn't sell them hard liquor on a Sunday, but nobody ever put a gun in my face. But that ain't to say that I didn't have one or two incidents in there that put the fear of God into me, and this here is one of them. So I'm working late one Saturday night, stacking shelves and cleaning house, when a man walks in wearing a black tailored suit. It was one of those that fit him like a glove and gave off an obvious air of wealth, which marked him as an out-of-towner in my book. But that suit was just about the only normal thing about him. He was white as the cotton fields, so pale he was almost gaunt, with razor-sharp facial features and slick-back silver hair. I hear the little bell on the front entrance tinkle, so I do my thing and walk back behind the counter to serve him, which is where I laid eyes on him. He walks up to me, and with this wolfish smile on his lips, asks me for a can of lighter fluid. I fetch him what he asked for, making a little small talk as I'm ringing him up on the register. I asked him where he's from. D.C., he replies, just passing through. I gave him a polite smile and asked him if he was one of those politician types, to which he gives the vague reply of something like that. He then proceeds to take out the biggest roll of dollar bills I'd ever seen in my life, all hundreds from what I could tell, then places one down on the counter in front of me. I give the man his change, remarking that it's a good thing it had been a busy previous few hours, or he'd have wiped me out for change. I said it in this fairly jokey tone, expecting him to at least give a polite chuckle in return, but he doesn't so much as smirk. He just takes out the Zippo lighter from his suit pocket, just about the shiniest I'd ever seen, and proceeds to fill it up with the lighter fluid right there in front of me. I've seen a fair few of those lighters in my time, but never one that I could have sworn was plated with silver. I figured he must have been hankering for a smoke, something fierce, and I told him as such, but he replied that he didn't smoke. Right as he says that, he finishes up filling up his lighter, but not before accidentally spilling a little of the lighter fluid onto his finger. Then just before he pieces the shiny-looking Zippo back together, he brings the finger to his mouth and sucks the drop of flammable liquid from his finger like it was a drop of homemade wine or something. Now, naturally, I quietly recoil when he does that, not quite being able to believe what I just witnessed. He sees me do so and shoots me another one of those wolfish grins like he enjoyed the idea of freaking me out like that. I was just on the verge of asking him what that was all about when I hear the doorbell of the general store tinkle again. I look over towards the front entrance, and in walks this young lady who looks to be about the same age as my little sister. Couldn't have been no older than about 14 years old. Only she's dressed much younger, almost like how you'd expect a toddler to dress, in this denim skirt type thing with white embroidered flowers on it. She addresses him as Daddy, so I figured it was his daughter, and tells him she needs to use the bathroom. The man in the suit then turns to me, asks if there's a bathroom that his daughter can use, so I give him the key to one that we had inside the store. Only instead of just handing it to his kid, he takes out a little leather wallet-looking thing from his jacket and hands that, the lighter, then the key to the little lady, who then makes her way off towards the door before locking it behind her. I started to feel incredibly uncomfortable. Something about the whole situation just didn't sit right with me at all. I had a sneaking suspicion of what was contained inside the small leather wallet thing, but I didn't feel like I was in any position to confront the suited man on it, especially not based solely on a hunch. But it wasn't just that. The kid looked absolutely nothing like him. She had these soft, rounded, delicate features along with real curly hair, while the suited man's face was so sharp he looked like he could have cut a swath through a pumpkin patch. And the way she called him Daddy, a girl that age should be well on to calling her father Dad, Pop, or anything but Daddy. I tried to distract from my discomfort by asking him where he and his daughter were headed. "You ask a lot of questions, don't you, young man?" He replied, dropping what had once been a kind of formal civility entirely, and proceeded to stare a hole through me. His eyes, man. He had these narrow brown eyes so dark that were almost black, and I felt a shudder run through me as he fixed his gaze to mine. "Just making conversation," I remember saying back to him, shifting nervously behind the counter. "Well, you know how the old saying goes, don't you?" His voice was smooth, just creepily calm, like there was no emotion behind it whatsoever. Curiosity killed the cat. The suited man turned, then started walking up and down the aisles, eyeing up the products like we were some quaint backwater relic, which I suppose was exactly what we were. I get back to cleaning house for a minute or two, only it's more just going through the motions while I keep an eye on what this guy's doing. I figured it'd only be a minute or two before his kid emerges from the bathroom, and they fix to get back on the road. But 5 minutes goes by, then 10, and still no sign of her. Just as I'm about to ask him if he thinks she's okay in there, the bathroom door unlocks with a loud snap and the door opens up. There's no flush, nothing to indicate she'd actually been using the bathroom for its intended purpose, and when she emerges, she seems all sleepy and dozy looking. Then she hands back the keys, the lighter, and the black leather wallet to the suited man in a daze before giving him a lazy-sounding, "Thank you, Daddy." The way she said it right then, I knew he wasn't her father, and it was dripping with sleaze.
and the look he gave her in return was one a father should never, ever give his daughter under any circumstances. It made me sick to my stomach, and I wanted the pair of them out of my store immediately. But we rarely just come out and say something like that where I'm from. We'll say something with an implication, if you catch my drift. "Safe travels now," I remember saying to the suited man. My tone was friendly, but the look I gave him was not. He turns and looks at me like he was about to go through me for shortcut, like he could have eaten me without salt there and then. Then he walks up to the counter, places the bathroom key down on top of it, and says one final thing to me. "Remember, young man, curiosity killed the cat." And then he walks that little lady out of the store and then drove off into the night. I seriously considered calling the sheriff right after they left. But what was I going to tell him? That a man was traveling with a girl that appeared to be his daughter? I'd be laughed right off the line. I could have mentioned that I thought that there was something illegal in the leather wallet that he'd handed her, but I got the distinct impression that nothing we could ever accuse him of was really going to stick. He had all that money, and that look he gave me too. So I didn't say a word to anyone. But for the remaining few hours of my shift, and for the next few days, I heard his words rattling around my skull whenever I paid any mind to him at all. Curiosity killed the cat. This story happened when I was 15. It's been almost an entire decade now, but I still think about it quite a lot. This was our situation. My brothers and I live with my mom. I'm the oldest of 3, and my mom generally leaned on me to get things done. This naturally turned me into an adult from a very early age. Even to this day, my mom talks about feeling guilty for having to thrust adulthood on me so early on. She thinks that I didn't have a childhood, and maybe she's right. As you might imagine, my dad wasn't really in the picture. He was an abusive drunk, and when I say abusive, I mean seriously abusive. Up until the time I was 10, he lived with us, and whenever he would get drunk, he would beat the life out of us. It was always terrifying. The only saving grace was the fact that he wasn't always drunk or had alcohol in the house. In fact, there were sometimes, months at a time, when he would go without drinking, and he was an otherwise pretty decent person. For all that was wrong with my dad, he would have probably been close to an ideal human being if he had not been for his rampant alcoholism and the demon inside of him that came out when he got drunk. The incident that got my mom to finally divorce him was horrendous. I had been in my room playing video games or something, and he was in the living room. My mom just got home from getting the groceries. He accused her of having an affair at the time, and of course, this wasn't true, but he didn't believe it. He kept screaming at her that she was lying. It escalated to the point that he pinned her down on the floor and said that he saw her nose growing, and then grabbed a screwdriver and cut into my mom's nose with it. There's still a scar from that day. Well, that all went down when I was about 10, so this is about 5 years later. My mom was bringing my 2 younger brothers on some kind of Boy Scout trip. They were both in the Boy Scouts and always felt left out because all the other kids had a dad. My mom's guilt drove her to volunteer and help out whenever she could, so she went with my 2 brothers for this weekend camping trip with the Boy Scouts. She really wanted me to go with them because she felt uncomfortable having me alone in the house. I insisted that I was mature enough to do it, and honestly, I didn't even have friends that I could party with if I wanted to. She eventually gave in and let me have my way. I remember being in my bedroom, playing with my PlayStation. It was a pretty typical Saturday afternoon, but then I heard a car pull up. I didn't know who it was at first, and I immediately got really panicked that I was going to have to call the cops. My bedroom window doesn't have a really good view at the driveway, so it took me a second, but after studying the part of the car that I could see, I recognized that it was my father's car. I was immediately mortified. I was on bad terms with him, and my mom had a really serious restraining order put on him after they had separated. I got really nervous, and I was not sure what I should even do. He didn't come into the house for a few minutes, and I immediately started wondering what he was up to. I did the only thing that I could think of and cracked my window so I could hear what was going on outside. I thought that if I could hear what he was doing, I would have a better idea. I immediately recognized that he was crying. His whimpering sound was really intense. I hadn't heard from him in years, and my mom said that we would never see him again. But here he was, crying in our driveway. He paced around for a few minutes before finally standing still. I could hear his crying getting louder. Then he screamed. All I heard was a gunshot. The second I heard the gunshot, I immediately knew what had happened. I ran outside. I looked down at my father's lifeless body on the driveway cement. Blood everywhere. As traumatic as it may have been, I didn't cry. I didn't act emotional or anything. I just called the police. They got there a few minutes later and took me into custody. They wanted to keep me safe and secure until they could contact my mom. The rest of the story played out exactly as you would imagine. My mom apologized profusely. I had to answer some questions to the police. Nothing out of the ordinary. I don't really know what to make of the situation. I don't have much sympathy for the guy, and part of me is kind of happy that he did it. But looking back, I just kind of wish that he had done it where I wouldn't have had to have witnessed it. The entire experience made me never want to go stay home by myself ever again. It's been a long time since this whole thing had gone down, and even now, if I have to stay home by myself, I will make an effort to leave the house or to invite a friend over. I won't stay there alone. A couple of years have passed since this entire situation, and I can't help but to think that it was all for the better. My dad was a seriously destructive human being, and I know this might sound terrible, but I just wish that he had done it sooner. For those out there that haven't lived with a toxic and negative parental figure, consider yourself extremely lucky. The tribulations that I had to endure at the hands of my father fostered a lot of rage inside of me.